so many teams and so many programs are going away from the true spring game. And really, if some coaches were honest with you, they would say, I'd actually rather have nothing at all. They have OTA mini practice style where it's a couple of days here, a couple of days there. And we just kind of survive until we get to fall camp because you don't have to worry about the portal. I think most coaches would tell you for some reason or another, they're afraid. Jedd Fisch is on the opposite end of that spectrum. Jedd Fisch has basically made it very clear. He's planning this like, I want to have a spring game. I want to have 40,000 people come out to Husky Stadium on a Friday night at 6:30, which is, I don't know, I have my own opinion on that, but I'll save it. Where at least he's willing to have it. He's not afraid to say, hey, like, well, these coaches might watch our game and poach our players. First of all, the concept of that, like, can we just address coaches getting paid millions and millions and millions of dollars to recruit these players, and your first concern for having a spring game of, even if it's just a boring scrimmage, where I lived through and covered the Chris Peterson era, I've covered the Sark years. They're not spring games in the sense of a true 60-minute game like you would get on a college football Saturday. It's never designed to be that. But it's a way to say, hey, look what we got. Here's our fan, by the way, going back to the last thing we were talking about, fan engagement. Let's see, where's the fan engagement out of the offseason before you truly get to the season when you should have a sellout crowd at every home game. Jedd, I think, kind of pushed it back a little bit to where you can use the portal, but you're not really going to be at risk of it, where at least by the time you're done with spring camp, you know who's on your team, you know who you're going into the summer and fall with. I think that was ultimately why Jedd made that decision. I don't know if he would admit that publicly, but I'm pretty sure that's at least one of the major factors. But otherwise, he's been on the advocation where, no, make it a party, make it available. Like, he hasn't mentioned going to play Colorado and Deion Sanders, and I know one other school offered that. I think it was Syracuse, but then also I think Mike Gundy also said, hey, I'd love to play Oklahoma in the Bedlam in the spring and charge $20 and use it for their NIL. Like, there's so many convoluted reasons to do it, but I get it's a matter of engaging the people in the sport and saying, hey, look, it's the offseason. It's not going to be even 80% of what it would be on a college football Saturday, but it gives you an idea, much like imagine if the NFL had some type of thing where, hey, one spring, by in April and May, the Seahawks are going to play the Niners and the Rams are going to play the Cardinals, and it's every other year it alternates. Don't you think people would still show up, and that would be kind of fun where it's not going to be like the hard hitting that doesn't matter, whatever, but it's still something fun to engage the people. So it was a long-winded way of saying, no, Washington has not started yet. So I think actually you'll be a great friend. I think Jedd's is open because all of their spring practices are open to the public, and then obviously I think the spring game on May, whatever, the end of April.
They're open to the public?
Yeah, they're open. Yeah, straight up. All of them. Yeah. Now, here's what I'll tell you what's funny about that. And this is not a dig at the Washington fan base, but it is different than, say, Alabama. If you made the same offer, you're only going to get 150, 200 people out there at practice, maybe for 14 out of 15. And then the spring game, you'll probably, last year they got 20,000. Depending on the weather, I could see them getting between 20 and 30 again this season. Jedd wants 40. I don't truly know if it'll ever get to be that much, just because they know for a fact it's not the actual game itself, and you can't make it a wine and dine event. But Jedd wants to make it a wine and dine event where, hey, like, we'll host some recruits, we'll do this and that, we'll make it a big family affair, like you said. And by the way, the one area where you can make this free and then recoup most of the money, they still charge parking. I haven't gone to certain Big Ten campuses this past fall. Parking ain't cheap. Like, I see now how you can make it free. And then, free. I would love that personally. Again, I'm with you on all of those aspects. But even let's just say you wanted to make $10 a car or family to park, whatever. Sure. Something small to where, again, you're not saying like, hey, free ticket, free admission, $8,500 to park. Okay, now it's no longer really free and there's too many catches involved. But yeah, no, it really should all be free because, again, it's not the main product, but it's like rewarding the fans, giving them like, here's a free sample. You go to the store market, you get a free sample, and then, hey, you know what? Wow, that actually tastes good. Let me go buy the whole thing. Let me try some of these brats. So let me go try one of these things, or whatever the case may be. Most of the time you don't, but at least still, it gives your fan base a reason. If you don't put something on in the spring and you just literally wait for August 31st or September 1st or whatever the first game is that comes up in fall camp, you use that as the run-up or whatever you want to call it. Why, as a fan, would I care as much about going to those things if you're like, well, wait, what's the benefit? I mean, in this NIL era, UW they had 3 weekends in a row where they had players go out and help sell Girl Scout cookies at the U Village, literally like 10 minutes from campus. So it's not a huge stretch. I would have thought, like, wow, like they advertised it. You would have had a bunch of people lining up. Damon had a little bit of a line, had a lot of young kids show up. And obviously, because, he's younger, he's going to draw that type of fan base. But you saw plenty of people walking by. I'm like, dude, in 2 years, let's say UW makes a national championship run similar to what Penix and the 22-23 team ended up turning into. Like, imagine if because I think DeMond's going to be one of the best quarterbacks in the Big Ten for the next 2 years. I've been on that train. I'm not afraid to be on that train. Let's say they end up making a CFP appearance either this year or next, and you make a run certainly next year. Wouldn't it be cool to say, hey, I got a photo with DeMond. I got to meet him as a freshman or as a sophomore. Like, these are all free opportunities for people, and yet you would think more people would take advantage, but they still don't. And so that's what intrigues me. Like, if you give it to them for free, they should show up. For the most part, on the big spring game they do, but the other access they don't. And it's just like, well, that's always my refute when people say, oh, I love your job. I wish I could come out and watch practice. It's like, right, tell me that when we're an hour and 10 minutes into it and you're completely bored because there's not much to see.
How Washington is handling the NIL situation.
So Washington actually has been not at the forefront, I want to say, but they've been out ahead of it. Chris Peterson first kind of helped that initiative get going with Montlake Futures, which has now basically become the go-to NIL destination for Washington. Most of the usually freshmen, sophomores, or new transfers have an NIL deal with Montlake Futures. The resources are there, long and short. And even when it comes to basketball, where people might be surprised when Washington spends $4, $5, $6 million next season cumulatively with the roster, with both returning players and new guys coming in, where the resources are there for Washington. They haven't shied away with it. I will say the state of Washington itself took forever to figure that one out in terms of put some actual legislation, have it signed, and actually go into law. But the university has been out ahead of it. And so I think from that respect, the situation, like the resources are there for Jedd Fisch. He made it very clear to, obviously football is the cash cow here. So when he came to Washington from Arizona, that was something he glorified. He's like, I did all I could at Arizona almost, where I won 10 games for a program that rarely wins 10 games. I think they have 5 10-win seasons their entire program history. Chris Peterson did that 3 times in a 5-year run. So to put it into context, Jedd knew the opportunity he had at Washington, and that was part of the reason was he knew the resources would be there from a financial standpoint. The house settlement, all those sorts of things will factor into it. But from an NIL perspective, I think Washington's in a fantastic position. I mean, they got Carter Willis from Kansas State to not take any other visits, got their premium left tackle that they wanted. I know he at one point was ranked in the top 3 to 5 in terms of tackles available. I know that's always an ebb and flowing list where, hey, we got the number 1 tackle. Well, now this guy's in the portal and he's the number 1. So, so semantics on some level, but the resources are absolutely there for Washington to contend in the Big Ten. It's just a matter of getting the right players on the roster, which I would say they were behind the 8 ball in that respect compared to Oregon. So I love Will Rogers. He was a great kid. Probably in terms of obviously his dad was coaching football down in Mississippi. You can tell he's the coach's son, where he's never going to give you he's always going to help the next quarterback prepare. He's never going to be, oh wow, you're benching me while I'm out of here. He was never going to be that guy. And given how Kalen left and Ryan, I still have video of Ryan Grubb talking about Will Rogers fit at Washington under their staff. So Will was always going to be the guy, but yet at the same point down in Arizona, Jedd knew for a fact. He started recruiting him, I think, as a freshman or a sophomore. I think DeMond told me it was 9th grade where him and Jimmy Doherty came down and watched him. And ever since then, Jedd's been like, no, this is the next guy. This is the guy. I know he's only 5'10", 185, 190 pounds, whatever that might be right now. I don't know. I know he's gotten bigger this offseason a little bit, which is important. But Jedd has viewed him as he's the guy. This is the guy. But at the same point, when you have a 6th year in Will, you can't just throw him to the side because let's say UW goes 4-8 this season. DeMond looks kind of good and shows you the flash of what could be in 2 or 3 years, but you just wasted a 5th year, 6th year guy who set records in the SEC. You had to give Will his dues. So what ended up happening, where I made this prediction on Locked On back, I want to say in August, around Big Ten Media Days or sometime like that, where it was a debate whether DeMond was going to play more than 4 games. That was the debate we had on the show. I said take the over. I think he'll play about 6 or 7 games. In my head, I couldn't justify Jedd Fisch's plan publicly, but I knew always Jedd had a plan to get DeMond involved in every single game, no matter what, some way, somehow. And once you got through, I want to say the Iowa game, it was pretty clear, okay, Will's not going to lead us to 8-4, and that's no slight at Will because the offensive line was also atrocious and all those sorts of things. And so DeMond kind of had been taking increased reps, and you could see, I will say, DeMond is one of the more poised quarterbacks that's as a young player that I've ever seen, that I've ever covered. Where he's very grounded, he knows exactly, he knew his assignment, he knew he should have been the starter, but he also completely understood why Will Rogers was the guy, and then DeMond would slowly take over as the season progressed. And just like that, that's the reason why he started at Oregon and then started against Louisville in the Sun Bowl, where Jedd Fisch made it clear after the Oregon games, like, no, Damon's playing in whatever bowl game we're going to. Like, the future is now. Will understands that. Will got 10, 11 games to give it a shot. And, I think Will would tell you he's not a guaranteed NFL quarterback, nor with Jake Browning. And I think Jake and Will might have the same track record where go be that backup, go be that, kind of good reserve scout team kind of guy. And if you happen to get a chance, so be it, because you know how to run an offense and things like that. But he was never going to be a first round pick, never going to be even like, in that Jackson Dart discussion of, is he a day one, day two guy? Will was going to be, well, is he going to, have a career? And no, that's not a shot at Will. I know that sounds crazy that he set SEC records and he might not get drafted, but it's just kind of, the style in which he plays. When you saw that, where I've never heard a coach openly say, the guy that we have a quarterback right now, I can't call the entire playbook for. The guy behind him as a freshman, I can call the entire playbook for. And we saw that in the Apple Cup, where you call a speed option into the boundary on 4th and 2 at the 1 yard line or 1 or 2 yard line. And it's with Will Rogers. Now, if that plays with Damon Williams, I think that is a completely different, discussion, because he creates a different gap, and Jedd has expanded on that. So I think now that clearly Damon has been the guy, he's got the deed to the house. They brought in Kai Horton as basically that Will Rogers. We need a veteran just in case, God forbid, Damon goes down. You want to make sure, because otherwise you got 2 freshmen coming in and that's it. So this is clearly Damon's roster and Damon's offense. But now I think Jedd knew, like, man, there's so much we can do with Damon. Like, I just need to have him be the guy. And that's why last season, you can't really judge him on, but you still have to judge Jedd Fisch on some level. But it was kind of like a free year. Now the real fun begins. Now you got 2 more years with Damon. Let's see what you can do. We saw Kalen make a run with Mike. Can you make a similar run with Damon?
Talking Washington football with Lars Hansen, and if you want to see spring practice and you can't with your favorite football team, like, they don't even let the media watch Florida State play at all, which I can understand. Maybe that was the media initiative that they said, we'll pass. We don't really want to see this team. Oh, but just making the point, hey, if you want to fly to Seattle and watch some free spring practices, you go watch Washington. But we got Lars Hansen here from Locked On Husky. So, Lars, I was intending to be extremely prepared, be a professional, overlook the offense and the defense, but I got a call from a buddy about 30 minutes before the show. And so I'll let you know, hey, it's all yours to take us through the offense first and let us know what we can expect in 2025.
So, yeah, I'm just going to kind of lead and continue with Damon, because everything starts with him aside from the offensive line. But one of the things that makes Damon so great that we got to see against UCLA and even Penn State to a degree, you can face a great defense or a strong defense, and especially a defensive line, and Damon's going to find a way to scramble for 30 or 40 yards. But he's not the type of quarterback to also quick panic and just not wait for anything to develop and just use his legs. I think that's one of his strengths. I think I told his dad, I don't know if I've said it on this show, but I think I've said it on Locked On, where I said Kyler Murray and Russell Wilson. If you marry the two together, that's Damon Williams. He's got the athleticism to run like Kyler and Russ to a degree. But, man, his deep ball, his moon ball, it is just like Russell Wilson. And that's a compliment, where Russ is one of the better deep ball throwers, no matter what people want to say about him. And I think Damon, personally, everybody would gravitate towards compared to Russ. So that tells you the type of person that Damon is. But with that being said, everything starts with Damon, and they did enough to improve the offensive line. We'll see how truly much it is, but they got Garen Hatchett back, Landon Hatchett's older brother, I should say, from Oklahoma. He spent his 1 year in Norman and was like, hey, I want to come back. Cool, awesome. He's not a guaranteed starter, but a guy who could play left guard, right guard. Almost that kind of essential veteran where they want to push some young guys. Pocky Finau, Zach Henning are 2 guys who I would probably pencil into, say, is competing with Garen at one of those 2 guard spots, and one of them is going to get the job and one will get the other, and Garen will find some snaps. But the one big one for me was the right tackle from K-State, Carver Willis. There we go. Name almost escaped me there, where he sounds like he's a guy that could play left or right, has played left or right tackle most of his career down in Manhattan, but UW doesn't really have a left tackle. They do have Max McCree, who I am a personal big fan of. His story's great. If you want to go check that out, just type in Max McCree, Lars Hansen on Athlon or whatever. He has a great family story where he had to kind of step away from football. He was, driving a forklift for Aldi's, and he was working at another plastic company at one point, but he thought his career was over. And so now he was able to show last season, like, man, when healthy, he's great. Took him a little bit to get back into football shape, and then had a thumb injury against Iowa, where if you remember that first drive against Iowa, it looked pretty good. And then the wheels fell off. The wheel, the hub, almost the engine, I want to say. Everything is Max McCree in that situation where it ended up being like a dislocated thumb. And, I asked a couple of coaches, like, wow, can you really keep him out that long just based off of dislocation? He's like, listen, like when you actually step back and think about it, it's a significant injury. And we saw the impact on that where the offensive line just got worse and worse throughout the season, leading to a 10-sack performance against Oregon, which was expected on some level, but you didn't necessarily think 10. Thought maybe 5 or 6, 7 on a bad night. Got up to 10, which showed how bad the line was. If the offensive line can just give Damon a chance, you got the weapons with Denzel Boston, who's UW's leading receiver, the guy who I think is a top 5, top 3 receiver in the Big Ten next season. You brought in Omari Evans from Penn State, who, again, I say Penn State, it's like, well, did he catch even 5 balls in his career? Because Penn State not necessarily great at throwing the ball, unless it's a Tyler Warren, who's just an absolute freak and a menace and will do great things in the NFL. Having watched that game in the whiteout, like, that was just brutal to watch from a Washington perspective, but you have to give your hats off in that respect. So you have 2 veteran receivers on the outside. Kevin Green is a guy who I would pencil in the slot. Audric Harris is a sophomore who's going to kind of push him for some reps. Decker DeGraff at tight end. He'll be probably your main guy. Jake Butt told us today that he could be a 50-catch kind of tight end where he's not going to be Ty Ward, but he's going to be up there in one of the top 3, top 5 tight ends in the Big Ten, potentially this coming season, if not in 26 for sure. So and then I'd be remiss, my gosh, if I didn't talk about Jonah Coleman, where they posted a body transformation photo before and after of his work this offseason, and he came back and built like a brick outhouse, that cliche. And so he's a guy. They got the running backs. They have all the pieces. They just have to have the offensive line. And I would be lying if I said I can guarantee you that it'll be, a top 6, top 7 online. But even if it's like a top 8, if you're just there, like last season, it could not have been worse. Like you could clearly tell this was their first season in the Big Ten, just solely if you watch the offensive and defensive lines.
Lars Hansen, Locked On Huskies, and we appreciate the calls, folks. We'll get to them in just a second, but I want to hear about the Huskies defense. So give us standouts, give us what they need to figure out this spring.
So this one's going to be interesting because Ryan Walters, the former Purdue head coach, who I have been learned, just don't judge his time at Purdue. Look at what he did as a defensive coordinator, which was fantastic at Missouri, at Illinois with Brett Bielema. And that was kind of the intrigue for me, where it sounds like we've been basically referring to it as a 5-1-5. We haven't gotten any pushback. Some people say you could call it a 3-4, but it's really more of a 5-1-5, which is interesting because they brought in 3 transfer linebackers. Jacob Manu from Arizona, who potentially could play the season, might not. I don't know. He told me he's going to be ready for fall camp, but initially the thought was he was going to redshirt coming off an ACL tear, but he looks physically fine, so I'm curious to see how he factors in. You got Buda Alukta from Washington State and Exree Alexander from Central Florida, I want to say. So those 3 all kind of fit interestingly for a 5-1-5. So I'm really curious, actually, just to see what it looks like, where kind of had the same thought with Steve Belichick's defense, where is it going to be a Patriots defense? Is it going to be what Washington ran before? Ryan Walters, I think, might actually have a few tricks up his sleeve, which I'm intrigued to see because, once again, they went heavy into the portal. They got Simone Peppa from Utah, defensive tackle, nose tackle, Ontario Thompson, who had a cup of coffee at Iowa, and then went to Western Michigan. Now this is kind of his big opportunity, similar to Max McCree, where former Big Ten guys who didn't necessarily do a ton at their previous school now get to prove, hey, I actually do belong here in the Big Ten. Taitai Uyunglele is another one, defensive line, defensive end, old-fashioned defensive end where he's not an outside linebacker but can be on the outside, more of an interior guy. It sounds like they're going to have like a 3, and then you have 2 outside linebackers, and then potentially 1 linebacker in the middle, and then you got 5 defensive backs with the nickel. And so I'm going to be really intrigued to see how it'll all marry together because some of the transfers they brought in, like Alex McLaughlin at safety from NAU, CJ Christian from FIU, 2 completely different safeties. So I'm curious to see how those 2 mirror together. And really, it's in a way a fresh start for Ryan Walters, where he, I think, learned some things in his time at Purdue the past 2 seasons. But otherwise, he's been a really well-regarded defensive coordinator. So I'm curious to see, like, what can that lesson from Purdue evolve his defense at Washington?
Lars, we appreciate you stopping by. And again, we want to encourage everyone to stop by Lars' work, Locked On Huskies. You see both the Twitter/X handle for Lars personally and Locked On Huskies, and you can catch his work right there. Lars, appreciate you stopping by.